my black and white position is unreasonable. I've moderated my position just a little bit. In other words, I was wrong to look at it in black and white terms, and I thank the guy for not flaming me, for um, telling me in a rational, courteous way that I was wrong.
The FAA has the 5 hazardous attitudes, and we talk a lot about decision-making process and that sort of thing, but we don't talk a whole lot about human behaviors that are related to that. And I'm talking about specifically being wrong, because we're all wrong at some point. We all have areas of ignorance. You have to be able to get past that. And Pat, I'm going to bore you with this, but one of my favorite books ever is by a woman named Catherine Schulz, and it's called Being Wrong. The subtitle is Adventures in the Margins of Error. She
Oh,
did a great TED talk, and really her whole thing is, and this is the crux of it, being wrong feels exactly like being right until it's pointed out that you're wrong. And then people get defensive. And you and I have seen this in aviation for years, where people are entering the wrong kind of pattern, not checking NOTAMs, doing whatever the hell they want because that's the way I've always done it. And they're not really open in that flight review or that educational experience to say, oh, maybe there's a different way. And we even deal with it here on Mad Props. We get comments from people who are absolutely positive they're right. And I can appreciate the perspective, but that doesn't mean you're actually right.
that's right. Doesn't mean they're right. It's exactly right. And it can be humbling when you find out that when you are absolutely dead certain that you're right and you find out that you're wrong, it can be a little bit humbling and a little bit embarrassing. I actually had it happen yesterday on a check ride to me.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah. I mean, I make a point when I'm getting ready to do a ride of reviewing the ACS, whatever it is, to make sure that we're doing everything according to what the ACS says, and so on and so on and so forth. And we came to do a power on stall. And commonly, what happens is you decelerate to rotation speed, and then add power and pitch up. ACS says no less than 65% power. Well,
That makes sense. Sure.
this particular applicant um, set up for his power on stall, and then basically just hauled back on the yoke and put us in about a, I don't know, 40-degree nose up pitch or something like that. And
That's
and
getting awfully close to aerobatic. It might even be considered aerobatic.
and I'll tell you, the break was impressive. Um, he ended
What
up
kind of an
dropping
aircraft was this, by the way?
172.
Okay.
So, oh no, I'm sorry, 182. But anyway, he ended up busting the ride, not because of that. There were some other things. That alone would have just been a debrief item, but he lost about 40 degrees on the recovery, dropped a wing and tried to pick it up with the aileron, had a secondary stall. In other words, it was really kind of ugly.
Okay.
But as I was debriefing him, I said normally we would slow down to rotation speed, then pitch up and add your power. And I said, the ACS says that. I said, let me pull up the ACS and I'll show you. And I had a copy with me, and it doesn't. It says as specified by the evaluator. I never specified.
Aha.
So the way he did it, if he'd been taught to do it that way, I can't really say anything about it because I didn't specify. And the ACS does not specifically say slow down to rotation speed, even though typically that's the way it's demonstrated.
I get that though. We have a video that was a month or two ago where I had been doing a checkout with a woman in a 152. She's a very talented pilot. She owns a 210, but she was checking out in the 152 so she could do flights with the kids. And we started talking about doing a power off stall. And I asked her how she wanted to do it, and she was going to, reduce power and enter descent and then pitch up to get the stall. And she said, "How do you do it?" Well, I'm an old guy. And what we used to do is reduce power and just keep pitching up to maintain altitude, and it would eventually stall.
Right.
I don't care which way we do it because this isn't a check ride as
Right.
long as we do it. But, there's a thing we have, and I don't mean you and me, I mean humans as a general rule. When somebody in a position of authority or awareness points out something we're doing in error, we get defensive because we think they're saying there's something wrong with us. And that's not what they're saying. They're saying, hey, this is the way we should be doing this. And that's actually a great story of yours where we go look it up in the ACS and find out what it actually does say. Because I remember as a young instructor, I got very uncomfortable with some airplanes doing power on stalls with full power
Right.
because you would get out in a very nose high attitude and it would take a long time to bleed off the speed. And it was a while before I read a practical test standard closely and realized, oh, there's nothing in there about full power. It's at least 65%.
Right.
So, I mean, like the air cam, there's no way I'm doing a power on stall at full power.
That would be exciting too, I
It,
suspect.
way more exciting than I want to do. But there are so many of these examples where, and you and I have both seen this where we do seminars, whether it's a rusty pilot or whether it's an ASI presentation on something, and somebody in the audience will take offense. That's not the way I do it. That's not the way we do it around here. Well, maybe you're doing it wrong. What's your reference? It's not just whatever we make up.
Yeah, that is a tough one, and it really does require some uh, diplomacy. I'll put it that way.
Hmm.
When you're dealing with somebody like that, um, sometimes sometimes they are just flatly wrong, and sometimes um, it's a matter of technique, and the technique is neither right nor wrong. It's just different.
Hmm.
I have had a pet peeve for years. You and I've talked about this: the entering the traffic pattern on the so-called teardrop entry.
Yep.
If it's done properly, well, let me start from my initial stance. I hate it. Don't do it. It's dangerous. Black and white.
Hmm.
And part of the reason for that is that I was almost hit twice in a near miss situation with somebody doing it incorrectly. And so usually I would I would kind of rant on that for a little bit at various seminars, Rusty's and others, Rusty Pilots and others. And I had a gentleman email me a day or two after a Rusty Pilot seminar. This has been a couple of years ago. And he said, I disagree with your blanket statement about um, teardrop entries. And he said, and here's why. And so, okay, I really do want, I genuinely, I want to hear what he had to say. And he very articulately explained that the way, if it's done correctly, and that is according to the Airplane Flying Handbook, Chapter 8, or if you're looking at an older version, Chapter 7, if you in fact enter that traffic pattern, the traffic pattern that way, and you are indeed 2,000 feet AGL, in other words, 500 feet above the highest traffic pattern altitude, which is twins and turbines,
Hmm.
and you fly out at least 2 miles beyond the downwind leg and start your turn back in, you're far enough away from the airport environment to avoid any potential conflicts. Now, after reading that and going back and verifying with the Airplane Flying Handbook, I thought, my black and white position is unreasonable.
Hmm.
Um, I'm still not a fan of the teardrop entry for the reason stated. If it's done incorrectly, it's still probably the most dangerous way there is to enter a traffic pattern. But if someone knows how to do it correctly and executes it correctly and is taught to execute it correctly, I've moderated my position just a little bit. In other words, I was wrong to look at it in black and white terms, and I thank the guy for not flaming me for um, telling me in a rational, courteous way that I was wrong.
Well, I hate to tell you this, Mr. Brown, but that's a sign of maturity that you were willing to modify your position based on new information. You might be growing up.
Oh, oh no, 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 no. I may get older, but I'll never grow up.
Well, I'll tell you, I had an interesting experience that has always stuck with me. I was teaching a Rusty Pilot seminar in front of a good crowd, probably 80 people or so. And during one topic, two guys in the back started getting a little hot with each other. They started arguing their various perspectives on this, and it was totally subjective. It wasn't based on anything. It was just I do it like this. Well, I do it like that. Blah blah blah. And when they finally settled down, there was an old man sitting in the front row, and I mean, he was an old guy. And he raised his hand, and I called him, and he introduced himself as a retired Eastern Airline captain. He said, "You know, I was always taught to conduct myself in a way that would benefit me at the hearing." And I absolutely love that because he's basically, in his world, go to the company manual. What does the company manual say? Now, we're Part 91. We don't have a company manual in most
Right,
cases.
right.
Go to the FARs, go to the airplane flying handbook, go look at an advisory circular, figure out what does the FAA want, because that's what they've told everybody. That's what they're saying. This is the standard. And if we do what's expected of us, safety goes way high. But if we go off on our own and just do whatever we want, safety degrades. And that's where people, they're no longer thinking openly. They're no longer really looking at creative options for how to deal with problems. They're getting personal. They're getting mad. You don't think well. That's where bad things can happen.
Somebody once said, it might have been a flight instructor or maybe a grizzled old professional pilot like you're talking about, but someone once said to me, imagine sitting in front of an FAA administrative law judge and trying to explain your actions. So basically, a variation on what you just said.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Or your insurance carrier.
or
That
even sure,
that's
maybe
a
even
one too.
worse. Yeah. So
Well,
so
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, I was going to say, so, when I'm tempted to do something, and we're all human and we are all tempted from time to time to say, hey, watch this, hold my beer, right? Um, we're not while flying, by the way, but we're all tempted to do stupid things from time to time just because, hey, that looks like fun. But whenever that temptation occurs to me, and it still does after 54 years, every now and then I'll think, wow, that would be fun if only fill in the blank. And then I
Mhm.
think, yeah, but careless and reckless. you know? And
Yeah.
what's it going to sound like if I have to explain my actions?
Well,
And
interestingly enough, I've found the people I have the least issue with this with is really professional, highly trained pilots, military pilots, and commercial airline pilots. And I used to instruct at the seaplane base in J3 Cubs, and sometimes I'd be flying with somebody who normally flies Big Iron, but they have a layover in the area and they come out to fly the seaplane. And it's absolutely great because they were flying a multi-engine turbine with a couple hundred passengers behind them, all kinds of gizmos in the panel, and they're top notch. They're well trained. And all of a sudden, they're in a 1,300-pound seaplane, a Cub, 65, 100 horsepower, no instrumentation to speak of outside of the windshield.
yeah,
And they take the attitude, I don't know how to do this, but I'd like to do it. So walk me through the process.
right,
That's so much better than the people who just go jump in the airplane and I can figure this out.
right.
And we've unfortunately done some videos on people who took that attitude where they bought an airplane, they've owned it for sometimes just a few days, and they go fly in the worst conditions because, oh, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And they unfortunately find out very quickly, no, you don't, with the worst possible ramifications.
So, here's a good example. This is just actually just happened a few hours ago. I was at West Houston Airport. I had taken some people flying that they're not aviation people, and I was kind of sharing with them the joys of flying. It's a gorgeous day here in South Texas. Perfect day to introduce somebody to little airplanes.
Hmm.
And I've got a good friend is about 85 years old. You wouldn't know it to look at him, but he realized that it's probably time for him to hang it up. And he had this beautiful, beautiful a Mooney E model, an M20 E model with a Johnson bar and all that.
Hmm.
And the new owner came to pick it up today. A 26-year FedEx captain with who knows 25, 30 hours, flew fighters in the service. In other words, a seasoned aviator.
Hmm.
And the guy that bought the airplane, he was waiting for a check pilot to come and check him out in that Mooney, despite the
Yeah.
fact he has other general aviation airplanes in his stable of airplanes. He didn't have a Mooney, and he'd never flown one with a Johnson bar. So for those that don't know what a Johnson bar is, it's basically a big lever in the center of the Mooney where you can put the gear up and down, and it's quite a feat to do that. But it was called
Also
a
known
Johnson,
as the strong arm gear system,
the strong arm gear system, because it's
because it
all
does take
manual.
some effort.
Yeah, but but I was, I'm looking at this guy who probably has every right to think I'm badass. I've been flying 7.5s and seven
Hmm.
sixes and whatever for 26 years, and look at me, by golly. And instead, his response was, "Yeah, I'm bringing somebody in that's got some M20E model, not just any Mooney, but an E model with a Johnson bar, because they are different. The later
Oh
models
yeah.
with the electric gear and electric flaps versus this model with hydraulic flaps and you've got to pump down like this. So to his credit, he realized that just because he flies the big iron did not mean he was um, qualified to fly that airplane home. And so good on him.
Every time I've flown a new type, even if it's a really benign aircraft, I fly it with somebody who's got experience in it. And
Yeah.
it's because I just don't have that big of an ego. I have no problem saying, I've never flown one of these. Let's go get some time in it together so I can get comfortable. And part of that comes from an experience I had as a relatively young flight instructor. I was matched up to fly with a student who was a private pilot, and he probably should have just gone for a flight review, but the owner of the flight school convinced him to get a commercial, so I was paired up with him. We only did one flight together. He was okay, but he flew a tiger moth on his own. Propeller turns the opposite way in a
Hmm.
tiger moth, so there's right turning tendency, not left. So he understandably had a little bit of challenge flying a Cessna. It's a little different, but we were in the pattern. He'd been behind the airplane a little bit. I pointed out some opposing traffic as we were in the pattern, something to be aware of. And he just lost it. Started yelling at me about he's in command. He doesn't need me telling him anything. And I'm just,
Wow.
well, okay, let's land. We made it full stop. I got out, never flew with him again. And that was just one of those things that you got to be willing to take, even if the other person is non pilot and says, hey, is that airplane close? That's not a criticism of you as a human being or a pilot. That's just they've noticed something. Can you evaluate that? That's perfectly reasonable. But if we don't stay open to the reality, sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we're ignorant. Sometimes we could use a little help. There's nothing wrong with that. And if we get defensive, if we start thinking we're being personally attacked, we're going to be worse pilots. We're going to be riskier, more dangerous pilots. And frankly, you're probably going to drive away some friends.
Well, I'll tell you one more quick story. This happened probably just before the pandemic, maybe 3 years ago or so. Um, I had a client, that used me about every 3 months or so to go out and fly in his Malibu PA-46, great airplane. And I'm approved by a couple of insurance companies to do insurance recurrency training in those airplanes. And so we went out and we did a few approaches. Beautiful day outside. We did a few approaches, and on one of the approaches, um, I switched off the autopilot, so we had an autopilot failure, and it was probably one of the ugliest approaches I've seen in a long, long time. So let me digress for just a minute and tell you about the conversation that we had before we took off, when he was recounting taking his family to a vacation destination. The weather turned bad. Actually, it was bad and forecast to stay that way when they left Houston. And sure enough, when he got to his destination, it required that he shoot an approach to near minimums. and he had his wife and kids and a nanny on board. So now fast forward to where we are in beautiful VFR conditions, and we're flying this approach, and it's ugly. I mean, seriously ugly. We finished the flight, and we got back and started debriefing. And I told him, and I told him tactfully, but the message was basically, you have no business flying an approach to minimums with your family in the airplane based on the performance that I just saw. And he didn't get angry. He did actually. There really wasn't much of a reaction, but he hasn't called me since. That's been three
Hmm.
years, and he used to call me about every 3 months. So I probably pissed him off, and
Well,
oh,
and but that was the appropriate thing to do. You're being honest. And if
yeah,
somebody can't take an honest appraisal of their performance from somebody they've hired to give them an honest appraisal of their performance, that's not on you. I'll give you another example of where this really can be life threatening, this tendency for people to not accept, I might be wrong. I might not know as much as I want. Even 10 years ago, GPS wasn't that common in aircraft. I mean, it was becoming more so, and iPads had just come out and ForeFlight was coming on. But I bet you have met a whole bunch of pilots, just as I have, who see the weather on that device and think, oh, that's what the weather is.
yeah,
No, that's what the weather was maybe 5 minutes ago, maybe 25 minutes ago, depending on the system.
right.
An awful lot of people have thrown into an active thunderstorm truly believing that it was over there somewhere when it was actually right here.
There, yeah,
Go ahead.
there's a well-known accident that happened here in Texas, up in near College Station, with it was I think it was a Lance or a Cherokee 6. I forget. It was one of those two airplanes, a Lance or a Cherokee 6 or something like that. And a gentleman had left either Florida or Georgia. I've forgotten some of the details as far as where he originated the flight, but that really doesn't matter. The fact is that it was at night, and he flew into a fast moving line of thunderstorms, and he thought he was in one place, and the actual radar tracings showed he was in another. And you can find it if anybody that's interested can Google that accident College Station, and in fact AOPA has a video on it, and you can actually hear the conversation between the pilot and the controller, who basically says, "Where are you going? You know, it looks like you're turning into the storm." And sure enough,
Mhm.
the radar track shows exactly that, and it was from not knowing the equipment and realizing ultimately that he was wrong about the equipment that he had on board. It's potentially fatal.
Yeah, and it's sad. So I'm going to encourage everyone, Pat. I hope you'll join with me on this. Just check yourself every once in a while. Don't take it so personally when somebody tells you you're wrong. Say, hey, what's the reference? Where does that come from? Why do you think what you think? It's perfectly okay. That's a good exchange of information. And you don't have to go out and buy the book Being Wrong, but I will put the link for that TED Talk in the show description notes.
Yeah,
It's got 5.5 million views. It's 17 minutes long. It's genuinely entertaining, and it will make you think about the difference between thinking you're right and finding out you're wrong, because they feel exactly the same until somebody really points out to you, no, you're in error here.
yeah. So I would also offer the corollary to that is that if you're the one telling someone that they're wrong, be gentle,
Yeah.
be courteous. You know, there are many different ways you can tell somebody that they're wrong, and many of them are not the best way to do it. I'll just put it that way.
Well, I think what you're trying to say, and I'll put this into more utilitarian terms, when somebody says, oh, you're supposed to fly even thousands plus 500 when you're headed east, the proper response is not, look, dumbass. It's just like, no, I don't think that's right. Let's go look at the regs and see what it says.
Yeah,
Let's go look at the airplane flying handbook or the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge. And look, that's what the FAA is saying. That's where I got my information. You're
Exactly.
right. You can be diplomatic. You can be kind, because yelling in someone's face, calling them names, or just repeatedly insisting you're right with no reference or nothing behind you, that's not helpful to anyone. That's not what a good CFI will do.
No, not at all. Not at all. You have to, a sweet, sour, sweet approach is good. You start off with something good. You kind of work into the things that are a little bit less pleasant, and you end up with something pleasant. Is the way is the way. In fact, an old boss of mine in the music industry, before, years and years ago, um, told me that. He said, if you've got to criticize somebody, first of all, praise them in public, criticize them in private, and use the sweet, sour, sweet approach. Start out with something positive, get into the stuff that's hard to talk about, and end up with something positive, and you'll get the change in behavior that you want more often than not. And I have tried to practice that. And generally speaking, it absolutely works.
That's why I love being a CFI, because at one point in my life, Pat, you may find this hard to believe, I didn't know a damn thing about aviation. I just knew I liked it. And I met this really great guy who taught me little by little. And after 10 or 12, 15 hours of working together, I could take off and land by myself. By 40, 50 hours working together, I was actually certified to fly an airplane on my own and be a pilot. I try and pass that on to other people, but he didn't get me there by beating on me and calling me names.
Right.
Would encourage me. He would congratulate me on the things I did better. He would point out the things I wasn't doing well. But hey, you've made real progress on holding your heading in altitude, so you can make progress on this too. Let's just work on it.
Yeah.
That's all this is. Just be open to some criticism. And as you say, when you're the person giving criticism, do it lightly and kindly. You don't have to beat people up or be insulting. By the way, that's true online too, not just face to face. You don't have to be a jerk in the comments.
That is so true.
Pat, thank you so much. I love doing these episodes with you. It's just fun stuff, but it's also real stuff we've learned over the years. And it all boils down to be a decent human being and try to make good decisions.
That's
Anything you
it.
want to close with, sir?
Other than the normal adios.
All right. Well, I'll do that then. I'll go adios right on out of here. Take care, buddy.
Later.